This episode of Backlisted is brought to you by Serious Readers, a reading lamp for people like you and me.
Serious readers.
I've got one of these lamps, and I think it's fantastic.
Yeah, it's a great lamp for reading indoors.
Perfect now the night's getting darker because it simulates daylight with its HD light.
Which means you can read for hours and hours without any risk of eye strain.
The great news is Serious Readers are giving Backlisted listeners £100 off any HD light and free UK delivery.
Just go to seriousreaders.com/backlisted and use the discount code BACK, B-A-C-K.
That's seriousreaders.com/backlisted with the code BACK.
And there's a 30-day risk-free trial, so you can return the light after 30 days for free if you're unhappy with it, which I very much doubt you will be.
How many discounts does USAA Auto Insurance offer? Too many to say here. Multi-vehicle discount, safe driver discount, new vehicle discount, storage discount, legacy.
How many discounts will you stack up? Visit USAA.com/auto discounts. Restrictions apply.
Whatever the occasion, effortless elegance is right this way. Because Hilton brings you new ways to stay courtesy of the Nomad London. And it doesn't stop at award-winning dining in a space draped in velvet and illuminated by vintage chandeliers. No, this day goes beyond with unparalleled personalized service and attentive hospitality. Oh, and did we mention the Nomad London can be booked using your Hilton Honors points at Hilton.com? Hilton, for the stay.
The new McCrispy Strip is here. Dip approved by ketchup, tangy barbecue, honey mustard, Sprite, McFlurry, Big Mac sauce, double dipped in buffalo and ranch, more ranch, and creamy chili McCrispy Strip Dip. Now at McDonald's. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
So without further ado, lights out for the podcast.
Hello and welcome to Backlisted, the podcast which gives new life to old books. Today, you find us in the back room of a slightly run-down suburban house in southern Manchester. It's February 1982. The curtains are closed and a gas fire wheezes on the wall, and there's a mess of cushions and blankets on the floor. A tall, pale woman with high cheekbones and greying brown hair, clad in black leather trousers and motorcycle boots, kneels next to a scrawny young man, lying in front of the fire, dressed in just Y-fronts and a ripped T-shirt. She jabs a syringe into his thigh, pulls back the plunger, and fills the tube with liquid. I'm John Mitchinson, the publisher of Unbound, where people pledge to support the books they really want to read.
And I'm Andy Miller, the author of The Year of Reading Dangerously, and I wish to applaud my colleague for framing in that metaphor he's just used this episode as a fix. The plunger has been duly plunged. So here we go. Today we are joined by two guests making their Backlisted debuts. Welcome, Caroline Catz and Will Hodgkinson. Hello, both of you.
Hello.
Hello.
Caroline Catz is an actor, director and screenwriter. She trained at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art and she's worked extensively across television, theatre, film and radio. Caroline wrote, starred in and directed Delia Derbyshire, The Myths and Legendary Tapes, which premiered at the London Film Festival in 2020 to critical acclaim ahead of its BBC broadcast. Delia Derbyshire, of course, who features as a character in Rosemary Tonks's novel, The Bloater, which we featured on Backlisted a few years ago. You must have read The Bloater, Caroline, have you?
Yes, amazing. It was a really interesting research bit of information for me. I had to go to British Library to find it in those days before it had been republished. Thank you for doing that.
Exactly the same. Yeah. The British Library's copy of The Bloater that's passed from hand to hand. People trying to find out more about the Radiophonic Workshop.
And I had to buy it for a couple of £100 I think, as well.
Did it really cost that?
It was a load of money, and then I gave it to the agent, who has not returned it yet, but I'm sure she will.
Yes, you need that one back.
Well, we're actually it's one thing we don't get paid for that, but it's another thing to be actually out of pocket.
All in a good cause.
The film has won several awards, including the South by Southwest Special Jury Prize, the Adam Yorkshire Award, and quite right too, because it was absolutely fantastic.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
Other film credits include Peter Strickland's In Fabric, and most recently Ian Forsyth and Jane Pollard's latest film, The Extraordinary Miss Flower, in which Caroline plays the titular role. The first time I met Caroline, I explained to her what Peter Strickland's film In Fabric was about, and she very politely said, "Oh, Peter didn't mention that." So, so thank you. That was very nice of you, Caroline. The Extraordinary Miss Flower is showing in competition at the 68th BFI London Film Festival 2024, and Caroline is currently appearing in Nathan Englander's play What We Talk About When We Talk About Anne Frank, directed by Patrick Marber at the Marylebone Theatre. At the time of speaking, Caroline, have you had your first night, or is your first night coming up?
We're still in previews, so we have our proper press night on Monday.
Wow, how
We're
exciting.
on our way. Yeah, it's great. Having amazing audiences already, and its October 7th audience was the one that we were most sort of concerned about, thinking that no one would come, but they did.
Yeah.
And in the end, it's very much, I think, acted as quite an interesting way of processing the year, the tragic year that has ensued. And really the play speaks about all of this, the horrors. We're sort of calling it a comedy about a tragedy, and that's how it is. Yeah.
I've just been reading the memoirs of Jim and William Reed of the Jesus and Mary chain. They've just published their memoirs. It's a terrific book. And I wanted to add to Caroline's credits to say that she is one of the few people to have sung the backing vocals of Just Like Honey on stage with the Jesus and Mary chain.
That's true. I can't even remember when it was.
What was that like? Can you remember?
It was fun, I think. Yeah. Well, I didn't rehearse with them. I literally just went there for the sound check. I'd sort of... Phil King had asked me, bass player, who was working with them on that particular tour, and then I popped in for the sound check and then jumped on stage with them, and it was actually great. I enjoyed it a lot. They were very cool. They were friends at that stage.
I was just about to ask, how
good.
well were they getting on?
They were doing good.
That book is fun.
Yeah, looking
really
forward
good.
to reading that.
Will Hodgkinson is a writer and critic and the author of Street Level Superstar, A Year with Lawrence, in which he follows Britain's most eccentric would-be pop star as he tries to rebuild his life after 4 decades of bad luck, bad decisions and missed opportunities. Regular listeners to this podcast will know that is my favourite book of the year thus far, and I'm not just saying that, Will. You know it is. It is a magnificent book, and you have achieved something with that book that no one, including Lawrence, has been able to achieve until now. And what is that, please?
Don't know. What is it?
You've given him a hit single. Well, hit book, but you've given him a top 20 hit.
I was talking to him this morning. He said that this woman came up to him in the street and asked for his autograph. And it definitely has happened before, but he's now actually dealing with, at the age of 63, he is kind of becoming famous, which is what anyone who knows Lawrence, and Lawrence was in the bands Felt, Denim, Go-Kart Mozart and Mozart Estate, will know this is what his mantra has been all his life. He's always said, I want to be famous. Most people don't want to be famous. Most people want to be successful for their, and fame is a byproduct. They definitely like to be rich. They definitely like to be acclaimed for their work. No, he wants fame, straightforward fame. And now he's actually beginning to get it.
And furthermore, fame of a very particular type. The fame as he envisaged it as an 8-year-old growing up outside Birmingham, and what pop stars were like then. Yeah, so it's been a long time coming.
It's all about that. That's something I realised throughout the book. He kept talking about the things he wanted. And he'd say, for example, when his album came out, which is January 20, the beginning of the book, I followed him for a year, so this would be January 23, and he was terribly disappointed because the album hadn't done anything. And he said, I don't understand it. It used to be that you got a review in the NME, and then John Peel played you, and then you were successful. It doesn't appear to work that way anymore. And I think he's talking about 1983. He still hasn't realised that the world has changed. Definitely his idea of fame was based on seeing Mark Bolan. It was seeing Mark Bolan's, 71, 72. I think it was Get It On. I think, I've tried to remember, it's in the book. It might be Metal Guru, but it's one of those big hits. And that was his idea of pop fame. And since then it's turned into a kind of magical talisman, which he's been chasing after, which can never be achieved and can never really exist in a way.
And now you be careful what you wish for, because you have granted him a sliver of that.
It's a sliver of that. We did a talk the other day and somebody asked him that very question. They said, well, you're now becoming famous. And he said, No, I'm becoming NME famous, because he always wanted the cover of the NME. And he was going to get it one time. This is in 1986. And then at the last minute, they replaced him with a feature on youth suicide. But to really sort of twist the knife, they used his profile, in silhouette, which he had absolutely no idea of until years and years and years later. So in a way, he now says, yeah, I've got NME fame, which is what he saw Jesus and Mary Chain get. He saw Bobby Gillespie from Primal Scream get. All of his friends, the Stone Roses, bands like that. So it's kind of going back to the thing that didn't happen to him around 27, 28, which is that sort of key age, isn't it? When you're just going out of youth, in a sense.
One of the reasons we wanted to, we're talking about your book, Will, and we're here to talk about the book we're here to talk about, is you make the point near the end of A Street Level Superstar, a brilliant point in my opinion, about, and something that fascinates us on Backlisted, fascinates me in my writing, why artists choose to do things they do, and why they choose to do them in the way they do them, be it in music, film, literature, whatever. Answer, well, perhaps they don't choose, perhaps they don't have a choice, perhaps they have to do it, perhaps they're dealing with whatever they're dealing with, and it comes out the way it does. And I think that's true of the subject of your book, and I think it's true of the person we're going to be talking about today. I should just say Will is also the author of Guitar Man, Song Man, The Ballad of Britain, and In Perfect Harmony, Sing-Along Pop in 70s Britain, alongside The House is Full of Yogis, a childhood memoir on what happened when his family went from being boring suburbanites to meditating freaks after his father ate a salmonella-laced coronation chicken.
It's all true. It's all true.
Since 2011, Will has been chief rock and pop critic of The Times. The only thing I wish to add before we get into the main thing is, Will, I've interviewed you on stage twice now about two of your books, and yet in Street Level Superstar, you describe Lawrence as being the best interviewer you've ever had.
Do I? Did I really do that? I can't believe I did that, Andy.
Oh, yes.
And you haven't forgotten.
No, indeed.
You're a pro, but Lawrence is not a pro in that sense.
I want to be a wizard and a true star. I don't want to be a pro.
You're that too, Andy.
Thank you.
You're all of those things.
But also, could I just ask, Caroline, you interviewed both Will and Lawrence together. My experience of seeing Lawrence on stage is very close to Will's, that he has to be led to the stage because he's, not entirely of this world and slightly frail. And yet when he's on stage, you're watching someone who knows exactly what they're doing and who has been performing like that for 40 years, who you can't take your eyes off him. Yeah. I wonder, is he a good interview on stage?
Yes, I mean, they both are brilliant together because they know each other well from years, but also this particular bonding, amazing experience of putting the book together, which has had its kind of ups and downs, and the book kind of tells the story of them trying to sort of negotiate whose book this is, which I absolutely love about the book. Because
that's still going, Caroline, that's still going on.
I bet. that will never end.
So actually have a book where you've got a book playing a character in the book is pretty meta, and I think very exciting about it. And I really love that sort of side of it. But also, I think he's a strange paradox, isn't he, Lawrence, in a way, because he's kind of weirdly content and not striving on some level.
Yeah, that's a very good observation.
Because he does kind of have this continuum of work and resilience, and I think the other stuff is a bit of a character he brings out, exactly as you say sometimes.
Yeah. That's a very good point in relation to the book that we're here to discuss.
Indeed, and that's why we've dug into that now. We could not ask for two better guests to discuss this particular book. So, John, take it away.
The book we're here to discuss is Nico, Songs They Never Play on the Radio by James Young, first published by Bloomsbury in 1992. It's an impressionistic record of Young's time spent as the keyboard player in the shambolic band that accompanies the singer Nico in the 1980s. Nico had come to prominence in the late 60s through her collaboration as a singer with the Velvet Underground, the band which more than any other spawned what we now call indie music. But Nico's solo career was an odder, darker affair, and the solo albums, characterised by her deep voice, elusive lyrics, and the drone of a harmonium, have grown in reputation since her premature death, aged 49, in 1988. By the time Young joined her band, Nico was both broke and a junkie with a serious habit, and the book spares no details in its portrait of the squalid, improvised quality of life on the road, what Young calls the universe in a van.
Between 1982 and Nico's death, they play over 1,000 gigs all over the world, many of them met with bafflement and hostility. In the book, there are memorable cameos from Allen Ginsberg, Nico's former Velvet Underground bandmate John Cale, the poet John Cooper Clarke, and through it all, blunders Nico's manager, the irrepressible Mancunian Svengali Alan Wise, introduced in the book as Dr. Demetrius. Grail Marcus referred to it as a coolly literary masterpiece, while Young was described by Danny Fields as the perfect witness from the nomadic court of the once and future goddess of the musical underground. And if you don't know who Danny Fields is, he was a personal friend of Nico's, manager of the Ramones and the Stooges. Has this book stood up to the passage of time? Well, Bloomsbury certainly thinks so, as they reissued it as recently as 2021. And Nico's reputation has waxed in the 30 years since this book was published. And both those subjects are ones we're going to explore over the course of the next hour. But first of all, here's a message from our sponsors. And we're back. So, Will, I'm going to ask you the usual question about where were you, who were you, when you first encountered Nico's Songs They Never Play on the Radio by James Young, if it even had that title. It's had about 3 or 4 titles, this book. Anyway, where were you when you first read it?
I was in my late 20s. I heard about it from a guy called Martin Green, who's a DJ at a club I used to go to called Smashing, and they'd play great music. They'd probably play some Velvet Underground songs like What Goes On, you know, some of the more upbeat ones. I knew all about Nico from same way everyone else did, you know, just from the Velvet Underground and liking that record and Autumn Parties and the songs that she sings on it. Beyond that, I didn't know, massive deal. And he said there's this hilarious book which was about her when she's really washed up and addicted to heroin in Manchester, playing these tiny gigs around Eastern Europe before the fall of the Iron Curtain. And so I was intrigued and I read it and I just absolutely loved it. I thought it was so funny. It's quite a nasty book in many ways, in the sense that James Young is a very clever character who's one step removed from it all. He's coming down from, I think, Cambridge. He's going on to have an academic career. It's not really his world, but he plays very good classical piano. So he comes into this really falling apart band. And what I really liked about it is that it had this kind of scabrous energy, but then it reached the conclusion of being incredibly affectionate towards this very difficult person who is Nico. So yeah, that was when I first read it. It would be late 20s. I'd be living in King's Cross at the time, very broke, not strung out. I don't know. I can't say I've ever taken heroin in my life. So I have to imagine what that's like, but sort of enjoying a sort of, not exactly a bohemian lifestyle. That's what it's probably a supposed bit of bohemian lifestyle before my life really got going.
Thank you, Will. Now, Nico only sang 3 songs on the first Velvet Underground album, and if listeners aren't familiar with that record, they'll know the cover because it's the one with a picture of a banana on it and with the signature of Andy Warhol. And many of us have a kind of formative experience when we first discover that music. Caroline, I wonder when you first encountered the Velvets or the Velvet Underground Nico and began to realise that they weren't the same thing, that they were different artists.
Yes, I was about 13 and there was a picture of Nico in Smash Hits and there was a picture of her and the Velvet Underground and there was Lou Reed and there was Andy Warhol. I'd never seen anybody looking like that before. They looked amazing. And you know, when you get obsessed with something when you're a kid, it just sort of like takes you over. It was a tiny photograph and I cut it out and put it on my wall. So I had these massive pictures and posters and, you know, Bowie posters because I really loved him. And then I had this little tiny sort of velvets thing that I kind of like sort of note to self, that looks quite cool, find out what that is at some point. And I didn't know how to find out what that was. And then I'd gone down with my birthday money to a record shop in Altrincham called Peter Swale's record shop. And I think he was like a manager of one of, I think, City or United, can't remember which of them, but he was one of the you know, football people. But he also had a record shop. So I went in there, and it was a cassette, actually. It was the cassette of the album. No, it was the Banana, and it was like, oh, that's that picture on my wall. Took it home, so excited, and it just blew my head off. And she just became my everything. I became obsessed about her, and wanted to look like her, and shoved a fringe in, and tried to, you know, do everything that I could to Nico-ify myself, like many young women when they discover Nico.
And did that lead you on to? Before we talk about the book, did that lead you on to explore the records she made on her own? I feel we need to just state again for people who may not be familiar with them what those records represent.
Yes.
Certainly, her first 3 records, Chelsea Girl, The Marble Index, and Desert Shore. When did you get to those?
Much later.
Bleak, brilliant records.
The first one, actually, I went backwards. I got Camera Obscura, which is
one with James Young.
Yes,
on, isn't it?
With the James Young one. I absolutely loved that album. That was my first one of her stuff on her own. Absolutely loved that. And then the Desert Shore stuff a little bit later. Absolutely loved those albums. I still play them.
I think, John, one of the things that's so interesting about this book is it seems to me to exist in 4 time zones simultaneously.
Yeah.
Nico is trapped in the 60s.
Yeah.
We meet her and James Young in the 80s. James Young writes about her in the style of the 1990s.
Yeah.
And we are now reassessing what Nico meant and Nico's achievement as an artist in her own right in 2024. So it's that fascinating thing about how the events are fixed, but the context really changes their meaning from era to era. And I don't know how you felt about going. I don't know if you've read this book before. Had you read it before?
No, I hadn't read it before, and I was absolutely fascinated to read it because, I mean, my Nico history is university. Fell in love with the Velvets. Kind of controversially among my friends, preferred the Nico songs to the other songs, you know. But then, you know, life intervened. I'd only really rediscovered Nico because of you, because I think you played a Nico record. There's a sort of weird medieval quality to her, the way she performs and plays. So I was really fascinated to read the book. And I think you'd maybe mentioned the book in passing, and you'd mentioned the James Will's biography.
Yes, we
as well.
talked about the recent biography, didn't we, on another show?
Nothing quite prepares you for the bleakness of the beginning of this book. I was unconvinced until I got about halfway through. You feel a little bit that the bleakness is really slapped on heavily in the early chapters, but he's won over by her kind of utter inability to kind of compromise with the world. She just is herself.
And the book actually gets nicer, doesn't it?
It really
kind
does,
of
I think.
Gets softer as you go along.
Yeah.
Less kind of, you know, talking about her strange odour and, you know, the things that, we'll probably talk about this, but things now I think you would probably think twice about putting in a book if you're a man writing about a woman.
Well, I would go so far as to say what Will's book benefits from the benefit of hindsight, of having read in your late 20s this book. Because I think, Will, one of the things you do in your treatment of your subject is treat them with compassion from the start. Whereas perhaps in James Young's book, he warms to his subject. I think you are kind.
Oh, that's nice of you. Yeah, I hadn't reread the book until now, just this week. it made a big impression on me all those years ago because I remember thinking how funny it was and how, there's a kind of desperate quality combined with a sort of compassion. When I went back and read it, I do think it's a very, very different book from the book I've written, actually.
Yeah.
It's quite mannered, like intellectual, slightly spiky. You know what I mean? That kind of, it's slightly sixth form. The kind of sixth form spiky, I'm coming up with a clever line here and a clever line there. And there's an acid quality throughout. But like I said, it gets warmer and warmer. So I think it is very different.
Let's hear from James Young now. This is from the mid-90s documentary Nico Icon. And here is James Young, the author of this book, and Nico's keyboard player, talking about the first time they met. Suddenly there was a knock on my door, on my flat. And there was this guy standing there who was an old friend of mine. And suddenly I heard this voice. Hello, where are you? And there's this woman walked up the steps, big woman, strange eyes. And he introduced me and said, this is Nico, friend of mine. And the name rang a bell, but I didn't really, And she said, can I use your toilet? So, okay, And she was in there for half an hour, So I said, what's going on, And he said, oh, this is Nico, Nico. Nico, I know the name, I said, from the Velvet Underground, Ah, right. And then it all made sense, and then I knew why she was in the toilet for half an hour. So that's how we met. That was the end, for me. Academic life and into something else, into a time tunnel from which I never emerged. A completely crazy but little world. Just a little world in a van of absolute craziness. It was a universe, this little world.
Why did you decide to write a book about your time with Nico?
Well, money. And I wanted to celebrate an aspect of my life and other people's lives that don't normally get much attention in rock literature. Failures. There's James Young, and he says there that one of the things he wants to write about is failures, which don't, or at least then certainly did not get written as much about in a classic rock hagiography. Caroline, give us just a little quick sketch of what life is like for Nico and her entourage when we joined them in the early 1980s.
Squalor, I'd say. And there's rain, there's Manchester, there's a Victorian backdrop of incredible buildings and architecture and bombed out houses that have just no redevelopment, nothing like Manchester is now, and a brilliant portrait of that sort of rainy landscape with this sort of iconic, glamorous ghost that sort of exists in between these sorts of filthy dive bar venues and sticky carpets and 2-bar heaters and hypodermic needles and shit-stained kitchens and kitchens, because there's repulsive things on the stove in the kitchen. The first moment you sort of enter into the book, there's like a saucepan of somebody's pus that's been drained from an abscess in their leg.
I hope you're enjoying this, everyone.
It's like...
and only a lemon in the
and
fridge.
A lemon in the fridge, yeah. It's really grim. He paints a brilliant, brilliant picture.
Yeah.
I mean, there's this other side of it as well, which I shouldn't... I'm now sidebarring, but I forgot to say in my initial introduction about how I came to sort of understand Nico. I never knew when I was a kid that she lived in the same city as me. In my head, she was like wafting around New York looking like that. And yet she was there all the time under my nose.
What is the kind of portrait that James Young paints of her creativity at this point? I mean, that is related to what Caroline's just said, because who is going to go and see Nico playing a gig in the early 1980s? Answer, anyone who might be interested in the Velvet Underground. And that's it, right? So where is Nico into her making her music? Is she enthusiastic to work with a new keyboard player from university like James Young?
She couldn't care less. I mean, I think the impression I get is that, first of all, she's a massive heroin addict, and my experience of heroin addicts is that heroin comes first before everything else, including themselves. So that has to be taken into consideration of everything. The other thing is there's two things going on throughout the book. There's a real sadness about the feeling that it's over for her, because she's playing in front of hardly anyone often, especially in the States and Australia and London. There's like a smattering of goths and kind of curious, and sort of, she's got this status as queen of the junkies, and she's completely a million miles away from this incredibly glamorous figure who's in Fellini films, who Bob Dylan went out with, who was, of course, this beautiful woman at the heart, fronting the Velvet Underground for that early period. So that's so far in the background. She's she's definitely got an artistic vision, which I think was formed around the time of that amazing album, The Marble Index. I think Chelsea Girl was slightly different because it was a kind of Baroque pop album, almost a continuation of the Velvet Underground. But by the time she made The Marble Index, it's like John said, this medieval quality. There's a song there called Frozen Borderlines, which makes me think of sort of flinty potato fields, frozen potato fields in somewhere in Eastern Europe. It's really cold and bleak, and there must be no sentiment.
Northern European.
Yeah, exactly. Very Northern European.
Well, Northern European, I think James Young portrays her, certainly in the first half of the book, as a bit like, I don't know if this will mean anything, a bit like the Groke from the Tove Jansson Moomin books. She's this dark, chilly figure who sweeps across the land, accompanying herself on a harmonium, her famous harmonium, which she pumps away at with her feet.
This creaking
to create
harmonium.
that drone.
Yeah.
But also, the music is weird in the book. I've never, considering he's a musician playing a band, there's usually a point, isn't there, where it all comes together and the band are all...
Yeah.
But you get this extraordinary feeling that there are these musicians just doing their own thing in a completely incoherent way. She doesn't like doing rehearsals. They do their thing, and sometimes it works, mostly it doesn't. And then she sits down with the harmonium, and then that's the bit of the concert that everybody's looking forward to. It's very peculiar.
Yeah, he's very, very dismissive of the musical abilities of everyone. I mean, the rest of the band seem fairly desperate, to be honest with you. They are junkies apart from him, and they're just about holding it together. And there's plenty of humour to be had when she, there's one point where John Cale, I think, comes in and says, there's some drummer who's a pain in the arse, and he goes by the time John Cale arrives, and John Cale says, "What happened to that drummer?" Everyone thinks he's going to be pleased. He's we got rid of him. He goes, "Well, that's a shame. He's the only person who could play." So there's a lot of that. There's a lot of feeling that it's really desperate measures. It's such reduced circumstances. This is the woman from the Velvet Underground. This is the high art maiden, and it just seems so not just squalid, but a bit comical.
Yeah. Let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll talk a little bit about the contrast between who Nico hung out with in the 1950s and 60s and who she's hanging out with when we meet her again at this point. So we'll see you in a minute.
Finding a new job is stressful. But with Indeed, it doesn't have to be. Just fill out your Indeed profile with your skills, experience, and desired salary. The more you fill out, the better your matches will be. And hearing from hiring managers will be 2 times more likely. Relax. That's your Indeed profile sending opportunities your way. Indeed, the world can work better.
Switch to Verizon Business and get more from your internet without paying more for your internet. Get LTE Business Internet starting at $39 a month when paired with select business mobile plans. That's unlimited data, and with it, unlimited possibilities. Start saving today with Verizon Business, ranked #1 in small business internet customer satisfaction by J.D. Power. Starting price for 25 megabits per second LTE internet plan with smartphone plan savings, plus taxes, fees, and economic adjustment charge. Terms apply. For JD Power 2024 award information, visit jdpower.com/awards.
Are your business expenses playing hide and seek? With Uber for Business, the small spends that slip through the cracks, like rides and meals, go right where you need them. Because it integrates with leading expense platforms, you can say goodbye to surprise costs, missing dollars, or chasing receipts. Everything's track downable. Uber for Business. Make small steps that make a big impact. Learn more at uber.com/small steps.
So we were just talking about Nico's 1980s, but Caroline, Nico's 1960s. And this is a thing I think that is not explored in this book in the way it would be now. So Nico works with, in short order, Serge Gainsbourg, Fellini, Andy Warhol, the Velvet Underground, Jim Morrison, the Stooges. And that's always presented, and probably is presented to some extent in this book, as she was so beautiful, and Bob Dylan, as we said, and Bob Dylan. She's so beautiful, and she had a series of men fall at her feet, rather than she was sufficiently talented to work with half a dozen of the most important artists of the 1960s. And I wondered how you felt about how she's portrayed in this book compared with how she might be portrayed now. You know, how do we feel about the respect that James Young does or doesn't accord her?
Well, I don't think he accords her any, hardly. I mean, there are moments where there's this sort of increased fondness, and their sort of relationship begins to sort of evolve into something where they have an understanding. But yeah, he's very disparaging, incredibly sexist, and superior to her. But then I think he's like that pretty much all the way through the book about everybody. But not. I think the problem, not to say that he doesn't give her a kind of a harder time because she's a woman. He does, most definitely. I think when she says that her only regret was not being born a man, it's because she wants the same power and privilege that men have. And that is something that, you know, James Young certainly doesn't seem to have any knowledge or interest in exploring. And that seems pretty typical 1990s thinking. Imagine you'd written a book about a sort of a male star, heroin addict, similar scenarios, icon from the 60s and everything. There would still be a glamour. It wouldn't be of the person that used to be beautiful that now is this. It would still, there would be a gravitas afforded to that person.
Right. I agree.
And I think that's what he takes away from her. There's one little moment that surprised me that I was like, I'm glad you put that in, where he was talking about they're in their first rehearsal and it's absolute mayhem. You know, nothing sounded any good. And then she just sort of came in and said, told him that he was playing too many notes and that it wasn't very good and that he had to be as minimal as possible. And he said, and she was right. And that's the kind of first sort of little moment where you go, oh yeah, there is a huge respect for her, but it doesn't really suit the story of the book to kind of start to talk about her vision and the power that she has. That comes a little bit later, but it didn't really sort of suit him to kind of give her that musical credit initially.
He's obsessed with her laziness, isn't he? He continually goes on about the fact that she was indolent. I think, was it somewhere he says, even in her indolence, Nico had an essential style that was uniquely her own, which is that kind of slightly damning with faint praise all the way through. But she does said, anything we might add was a superficial distraction, artifice. We were merely gate crashers on her talent. And you do also feel that very strongly.
Well, that's a very interesting point, John. I think when we've referred to how John Cale is John Cale, her ex-Velvet Underground bandmate, and the producer of her records, her collaborator in those extraordinary records. He is a useful character to James Young. You know, he plays that John Cale for laughs in the book, Will. But it's Cale who is the person who, both in the book and in subsequent decades, who has the most respect for Nico as a musician and as an artist. Cale can't be bothered with any of the other stuff.
No, well, Cale, yeah, he's kind of slightly more ridiculous than Nico. You know, he seems so egotistical. Whereas Nico, there's a certain strange dignity to Nico, because it's like, whatever the situation she's in, it's like she's totally accepted her situation, you know, and she's owning her situation. Whereas it feels like John Cale's still got these kind of rather silly airs and graces when he's coming into this situation. You know, all he wants to do is score cocaine, and he's in this horrible house in Brixton, but he's still coming in as the great John Cale, which I thought was a really, really good touch. Yeah, John Cale's interesting. You know, he was the guy that produced the Marble Index, and I think Desert Shore.
Yeah,
I think he had a lot of respect for her. Well, Lou Reed, maybe not. I don't know. But I think a lot of those people did actually have a strange respect for Nico, and a frustration also because of the life that she really willingly put herself towards. You know, she very much, I think, as I understand it, very much willingly wanted to become a drug addict. It wasn't like a terrible accident. It was the path of kind of icy nihilism that she chose, and that she wanted to go down. And she certainly, I get the impression that she certainly wasn't interested in being objectified as a great beauty, as in the way that she had in the early days. So all of that stuff is kind of coming into the book.
Yes, she wants to strip herself.
Yes, she
of
does.
Anything which might give people reason to like her for in the wrong way.
For the wrong reasons.
So specifically, she goes out of her way to de-beautify herself.
Yeah, she's not interested in beauty in that way. I think she's got vanity, but she doesn't have that form of vanity.
Yeah. The drug use as well is that she clearly has demons and a past, and there's self-medication that's going on. And there's that whole thing of her saying, you know, the bad thoughts come when I don't have smack. And you do wonder what those are. She feels that her relationship with Lou Reed was fractured because of what my people did to his people.
His people, yeah.
And then he dismisses that.
It's an amazing line.
He's right to dismiss it. You know, she said that.
It's incredible, that line, yeah.
Caroline, could you read to us? Is there a section of the book you could read to us? Because I'm conscious we've talked about Nico quite a lot. We haven't actually heard much of James Young's prose.
Which is a great reason for reading the book.
I would love to. Dr. Demetrius's musical awareness also convinced him that the American audiences loved English guitar heroes. So he hired Didsbury's very own Spider Mike. Spider did the Townsend Twirl, the Bolan Boogie, and the Richards Raunch. You name it, he could do it. He made up for me, who couldn't do anything. We gave it one last shot at a rehearsal. Smiler, the drummer, turned up in a Dayglow Hawaiian shirt, pastel blue slacks, and a pair of deck sneakers. Does he think he's going on holiday? Nico asked. He finished it all off with a crisp new haircut. He liked to look well-groomed, he said. I just lived for that hour on the stage. He'd always wanted to go to America. What a great opportunity this was. How much he appreciated Nico's choice of him as the drummer. How he'd do a good job for her. Also, he'd heard, in case I was interested, there were some hot spots in LA going for good session men. Top rate, best brass. Echo and Nico kept disappearing to take shot after shot, in the hope that the ghastliness would recede. Spider turned up his amp and went into a history of riffs. I stuck to playing just one note more or less all the time, shifting only when the harmonic changes absolutely demanded it. In this way, I kept myself hidden, tucked in between Echo's bass and Spider Mike's guitar, never, ever getting in the way of the vocals. Every so often, Smiler would do a fancy little flurry on the snare or a jazzy little rim shot. Nico would slump a bit further on a stool, completely thrown. Spider Mike dangled just above Smiler, spinning his web around Nico, buying her drinks with money he'd borrowed from me. His meanness was the only legend that preceded him, but no one had told me. that lugubrious hound dog face with a permanent drip of snot hanging at the end of his nose. He'd made it quite plain that he loathed me, as he did anyone who had brushed up against that soft-bellied South. I was an overeducated, middle-class twat, except twat was all he could spare. He was a word miser as well. He openly flirted with Nico. All right, sweetheart. And then he'd wink at her and he'd put his arm around her and she'd look confused. Do you think this is sexual? She'd ask me later. On the sliding scale of contempt, I suddenly moved up a couple of notches, above Spider Mike and Smiler, below Demetrius and Echo, at the exactly halfway point between hate and need, indifference.
Oh, thank you.
It's brilliant reading, and also it's pretty good, isn't it?
It's funny. The thing is, I think both things we can accommodate two apparently contradictory views on this. I found that very funny. I mean, that is funny. That is, and also very good writing about music, about if you're not musical, about how, the bits of the band fit together and they've got to leave enough space for Nico's voice to be the center of the thing. That's really well done. But at the same time, Will, I was thinking about what you were saying about how it's nastier than I remembered it. And it occurs to me the 90s element of it is it's a young man's book. And a young man in the 90s and a young man who has read a bit too much Hunter Thompson and likes the idea of the gonzo. Nick they are the gonzo character in the narrative, right?
Yeah, that's completely true. But I think this is something which I felt as I got older. You can read a book and you can see its flaws, or you can see you can see that the person writing it isn't always being lovely and wonderful. And you can appreciate that. It doesn't take it away. Do you know what I mean? So that's something I felt. I think when I first read it, I thought it was hilarious and great. When I read it back, I thought, I bet you he wouldn't write it like that now. I don't know how old he is. He must be in his 60s by now. But I bet you James Young wouldn't write it like that. I think, in fact, there's a guy I know who tried to do a reprint of it. And he was speaking to James Young. And James Young said, I want to take out all the stuff about Le Kid. Now, Le Kid is the funniest character in the book. Le Kid is Nico's son, who's also Alain Delon's son. It's a really sad story. The guy's now dead. He was a heroin addict himself, and Nico basically got him onto heroin. Mm-hmm. But it's so funny in the book. And the thing is, if you took away Le Kid, you're taking away a massive part of the book that makes it what it is. So it couldn't be rewritten. And I think James Young kind of wanted to rewrite it out of guilt. I think he felt guilty about the way he portrayed Nico and felt that this was a snotty young man kind of, doing all this. You can't do that. Do you know what I mean? You just can't. You're not. That's not the piece of art it is. And it is brilliant, but the nastiness is an essential part of it because it shows how we're all flawed. It even shows how James Young is flawed. He's far from perfect.
I think it's that it has a sort of cynicism within it that is definitely that.
Yeah, young man cleverness.
The thing, as you say. Yeah, which is, it can be a bit jarring looking back on it now. But on the other hand, there's a sort of brutal edge to it that's really true and really, really real that you wouldn't really want to soften off because it's him at that age inserting himself in a world that he's actually trying to handle. And I really believe that part of it. And you sort of understand why he's there. It's not like, sometimes when you read a book and you go, why don't you just fuck off? Why are you still there? But with this, you sort of like, it's really, really clear that it's somehow important and he's doing a favor and he's curious, but he's not just there because he's trying to get a book out of it. And that's the thing that saves the book. Because I really, truly believe he didn't think about writing a book when he was doing it.
Yeah, that's very,
what I love
true.
about it. I really love the character observations, the way you might feel when you're feeling very lonely and isolated in a world where you're slightly out of your depth, and you comfort yourself with thinking that you understand what these people are, but they're just massive projections, cruel, sort of two-dimensional ways of assessing a person without really thinking of them 360, which is something that's another young person's thing, I feel.
Yeah. But the thing is, I think all of that is unselfconscious, and which is why it works.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, there's an amazing line, you know, so, you know, John Cooper Clarke is watching static on the television at 3 a.m. and, you know, comes in to turn it off, and John Cooper Clarke suddenly wakes up and goes, I was watching that. You know, things like that, you know.
That's brilliant.
You know,
See,
John, what is that phrase? The phrase recalled in something chaotic, recalled in tranquility, or something like that.
Emotion recalled in tranquility, Wordsworth. Yeah.
Okay, so emotion recalled in tranquility. I think one of the reasons why this book works is James Young has not achieved tranquility when he writes it. There's a kind of post-traumatic element to it, which is still vibrating off the page. And I wondered, Will, without making any comparisons, you know, Lawrence is perhaps not as dangerous a character as Nico, but he's on his own. He's on his own clock, right? Though, Will, he's on, and you as the
very much so
as the chronicler of that. Did you have to adopt some kind of? I mean, it's different, isn't it? James Young is in the band, and then when that period of his life is over, he writes about it. Whereas you are knowingly putting yourself in, you know, mild harm's way.
Mild.
Did you feel that coming through when you wrote the book, or did you feel it more when you were experiencing it? If Lawrence was giving you the runaround.
I was experiencing it and writing the book at the same time, so I felt it very viscerally. I felt that the only premeditated thing about writing Street Level Superstar was that I was going to spend a year with him, and I was going to write about that as he tried to rebuild his life. Apart from that, everything that happened naturally, and I didn't try, and it wasn't like sort of unplanned in a way. So all the frustrations that you'll read, because Lawrence stands me up, nothing is ever his fault. So if he stood me up, I remember one time I planned to meet him, and, you know, I've got my own full-time job and everything. It's quite, you know, it's quite hard to carve out the time. And I was meeting on a Friday. I went to his local cafe just outside his flat and waited and waited and waited. And about an hour, you know, texting him. And eventually I went over to his door, rang the doorbell, didn't answer. And for whatever reason, he wasn't coming out. And then the following day, when I was furious and I shouted at him, he said, you were meant to call me the night before. I was like, what are you talking about? And apparently it was my fault, even though this is arranged many, many times. It's my fault that I hadn't called him, though I had texted him. The text didn't count, apparently. I had to call him at maybe 10 p.m. and say, I'm meeting you at 10 a.m. the following morning outside your flat. This kind of stuff, you know, that would drive me absolutely crazy. So all of that went into the book. The difference between the James Young book is that he did it. And like Caroline said, he wasn't trying to write a book about it. So I was trying to write a book about it. And I put that I'm trying to write a book about it in the book all the time. You know,
it's very
and
different.
so every time he told me, he kept giving me rules all the time. He kept saying, right, you're not allowed to use the word just. And I'd say, why not? He'd go, I just don't like it. So obviously I'm going to put that in the book.
I think I know where he gets that from. I think it's a Lennon and McCartney thing. I think they had a pact that they would never use the word just in a song because it was a filler word.
That would totally make sense, because most of the things that Lawrence has got for his life, he's got out of other people's books and films and
one
records.
on Clue, Will. One on Clue. So I wonder if I could ask John, you know, the way we're talking about, James Young talks about a person he believes is to a greater or lesser extent talented, and Will is talking about writing a book about somebody talented but infuriating. And I wonder whether your experience as an editor and a publisher, you know, part of the theme of Backlisted, as Andrew Mail, as our former guest and friend Andrew Mail says, is it really ought to be called Their Poor Agents, because nearly every author we cover has a problem or an issue or doesn't like other people. We've never actually talked about this in all these episodes. John, do you take a philosophical view of how much you'll put up with from somebody you work with?
Yeah, it's such a difficult one, isn't it? Because there are really extraordinary people who I've worked with who are a joy to you know, they're fine, and then there are people there's obviously some sort of horrible Boston matrix here. You don't want awful people who are talentless, and there are plenty of them. The really tricky ones are the very, very difficult people who, when you read the work, you think, my God, this is brilliant. This is why I put up with all the other stuff. I think what's interesting in the James Young book is he clearly admires Nico's talent. I think almost the weirdest thing in the book, which I did a bit of burrowing into, was his relationship with Alan Wise, with Dr. Demetrius. And Alan Wise said that they basically invented that character together. I mean, Alan Wise was also a bit of a fantasist, so you don't know whether that's really true or not. But when people came and said, well, how did you feel about your presentation in the book? He said, I loved it because it was basically, I discussed it with James and we invented the character of Dr. Demetrius together. I mean, I think Young is kind of in love with that idea of monstrous, that in the Claire Deidre, that monsters make great art. And he makes Nico more monstrous. I haven't read the Jennifer Otter Bickerdike book, but you talked about it, Andy, didn't you? As an attempt to try and wrest the Nico story back from misogynist blokes.
I mean, it's interesting, that book. It's simultaneously a necessary corrective to lots of the stuff we've been talking about, while at the same time it's not the whole picture. And we're blessed in a sense that the subject of Andy Warhol and the Velvet Underground and the members of the Velvet Underground and Nico is so well covered in different books. There's Dick Witz's book, there's James Young, there's the recent biography you're just talking about, there's Victor Bockras's Velvet Underground books, there's all the books that came out of the factory. We do get to see, Rashomon style, these characters in the round. And I would argue that's one of the reasons why Nico's work of the members of the Velvet Underground, Nico's work is the music that has grown in stature the most over the last decades.
That's really interesting.
As you get to learn more about her, rather than just as this glacial ice maiden hanger-on, so you begin to understand the layers of the work and the fact that Cale would stand up for his work with Nico more than he would stand up for his own work. He believes that's his contribution. There's a brilliant thing in Nico Icon where he says, well, the Velvets were great, but really it was a means to an end. And the end was it allowed me to make those records with Nico, which is what I will be remembered for.
So interesting.
Which is fascinating, right? Now, listen, we're going to hear a clip from Nico herself being interviewed on the radio in the mid-1980s in Melbourne in Australia. She's on tour. And when I first found this, I thought, okay, well, this is, here's Nico, slightly otherworldly, talking about, her work. But I want to contextualize it by reading a very brief part of James's book. So in James's book, he's still in the band in 1985. So this interview happens when these events are being described. So when I get to the end of the reading, we'll hear from Nico herself. Bondi Beach offered Nico most of her everyday needs, all-night pharmacists and health food shops. Nico was on something of a health kick at the time. She'd settle on one food substance, like yogurt, and she'd stick exclusively to it. The idea of planning a menu for herself and then eating it alone was too depressing a prospect. So she'd just think, yogurt. You don't need to chew yogurt. At first, it seemed the gigs would do well in Sydney. The first night they packed the place and the reviews were on our side. But Dennis had booked Nico in for 3 shows, and there just weren't enough doom dwellers in Paddington and Bayswater. Junkies there might be aplenty, but the difference was the sun shone all day on their craniums, all that melanin-produced wallflowers who needed a different aesthetic climate to Nico's Teutonic fog. Most of the time, Nico had to stay behind to do endless interviews. Dennis had tried every promotional angle, TV, radio, newspapers, but still the attendance at shows was little more than a dribble. Our 4 nights in Melbourne coincided with the Australian leg of Bob Dylan's Endless World Tour. I'd so like to see Bob. It's been such a long time. Dennis called Dylan's tour management. He got the classic rock and roll runaround, call back at such and such a time, maybe you will, maybe you won't. Finally, Dennis got, maybe Bob will drop in and see Nico after his own show. Nico was so excited like it was a date. She had a bath and bought a new shirt. Throughout the gig, she kept craning her neck, scanning the audience for a glimpse of lonesome Bob. When he didn't show, I found her crying in the dressing room. No one comes to see me anymore.
Well, then the most recent LP has been Camera Obscura, once again with John Cale, and with a couple of his musicians as well. How did you find recording that LP? It's a very much a 1980s sound, isn't it? It's got a big drum beat on a lot of tracks and lots of synthesizers.
Yes.
Bit of a change.
Like, I would have liked to have gone to the Amazon River. Just sail along the river and record my record there, right, with the drumming coming from every direction. Like in Fitzgeraldo, that's how I always have to see a sound. I can't listen to it only. I have to actually see a film. Or when I don't see a film, I rather see the music than I hear it, or both.
Mm.
But I see it more than I hear it.
Does that mean when you're writing your songs that they go through that process, that you actually have to...
Maybe I'm a frustrated movie director.
Sounds like it.
If we didn't know what we know from James Young, it would be very easy to listen to that and think, oh, Nico, she's stoned. She's not with it. Well, maybe she was stoned, but maybe she also had terrible jet lag. Maybe that was recorded the day after Bob Dylan didn't show up. Suddenly you have that sense of fragility and strength, Caroline, the bravery of it. The same with you, Will, with Lawrence, People don't come to the shows. There's no money in it. People go, why do you make your records sound like this now? But they keep going. Yeah. Why do they keep going, As you say, is it because they have to? Is it because they can't do anything else? Caroline, let me ask you, you are a talented and successful performer. Why do you put yourself through it?
Well, I don't know. I don't know. When it comes to Nico or Lawrence, from what I can understand, there is just this continuum of a creative life. Lawrence keeps making music because he keeps having ideas. He's never going to run out of ideas, ever. That's what makes him a street level superstar, I think. That's the genius bit. And I actually think that's the same with Nico. The idea is the thing that she has, and that she's really trying to tap in and chase that. And all her demons come from the fact that perhaps she hadn't, until she gets to this point in her life, allowed herself or been allowed to just prioritize that thing of chasing those ideas because they have to. Yeah.
Because they have to, yeah. I mean, Will, you must encounter this as you, not just with Lawrence, but musicians in general, who go from all sorts of highs to lows in their careers and just keep going because they have something to say. They have that has to be said.
Yeah, that's very true. I think with Nico and with Lawrence, they are very damaged people, very difficult people, incredibly selfish, pathologically selfish, actually, incredibly vain. You could say all of that about them, but what you cannot deny is that they are as real as it gets. There is no pretentiousness. They'd love to be pretentious. They both kind of aspire towards pretentiousness, but they can't help but be themselves. And that's something which the observations that James Young kept making throughout the book, these little, his little frustrations, I recognize so closely as a certain type of person. There's an amazing scene where Nico's frustrated about something or other, and Alan Wise is really upset because he's just been to the Jewish ghetto and he's reflecting on 400,000 deaths, unnecessarily purged. and she couldn't care less. She's because the harmonium's out of tune or something. Now, you have to be a certain type of person to not care. Do you know what I mean? And with Lawrence, I found that it wasn't. He didn't mean any harm to anyone, but it's like he's so much on this mission that he'll be his own worst enemy and everyone else's worst enemy. It just has to kind of continue. There's a point where he was talking about when he was really at his lowest. Everything had fallen apart. Denham had been a disaster. He was on the verge of being made homeless. He was heroin addicted. It was really, really bad. And he said, any normal person would have said to me, why don't you just give up? All the people around him were getting jobs. Pete Astor, who'd been in the Loft and had been, hailed as a great kind of possible indie star, had got a job as a lecturer at Goldsmiths University. Douglas Hart, who'd been in the G. Mary chain, was making videos. And all these people were kind of functional. They get families and getting on with their lives. And Lawrence said, well, I can only compare it to Knut Hampson's character in Hunger. He'd rather eat his own finger than get a job. And that was me, And I think Nico's the same. She was never going to go, you just couldn't go down the shops and buy 10 of her. And I think that's the thing with these people is that, I think the way real as it gets is how I describe it.
And the drugs, the drugs are interesting. She says at one point when she said, that she's saying about, he says, do you ever get lonely? She says, sometimes when there's not enough, what, she laughed. But even before that, things start coming back at you. Like all the bad things you've done, all the bad things that happen to you, it comes back like a riot. The heroin calms me down. And you do have a sense of these people that they have that one skin too few thing. They're much more kind of connected to feelings and it's interesting how drugs. It's so often with creativity, drugs become what starts as an escape becomes a kind of a problem and a sentence. But through James Young's book and indeed yours, they find a way through it as well. Cale appears both as a sort of alcoholic coke fiend at the beginning of the book, and then by the end he's kind of rather annoyingly cleaned up and brusque and doesn't want to have anything to do with any of them.
It's very self-righteous as well.
And Nico too, she goes on methadone and it seems slightly sad that he says at one point, I thought she'd live forever. she'd be one of those kind of eccentric kind of women in their 80s kind of, but she doesn't. She dies at 49 because of a brain aneurysm falling off a bike in Ibiza, kind of random.
Now, listen, we need to wind up there. So, John, do you want to take us out?
Yeah, we've run out of time. No time for an encore. But huge thanks to Caroline and to Will for joining us in the backlisted touring van. And as ever, to Nicky Birch for making this roughly improvised group of itinerant players sound like a tight band.
If you want show notes with clips, links and suggestions for further reading for this show and the 222 that we've already recorded, please visit our website at backlisted.fm. If you want to buy the books discussed on this or any of our other shows, visit our shop at bookshop.org and choose Backlisted as your bookshop. And we're still keen to hear from you on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Blue Sky, and wherever else you feel compelled to write from, even the desert shore.
If you want to hear Backlisted early and ad-free, subscribe to our Patreon, patreon.com/backlisted. Your subscription brings other benefits if you subscribe at the lot listener level. For significantly less than the cost of a bag of Manchester Skag, you get not one, but 2 extra and exclusive podcasts every month. Lot Listed features the three of us talking and recommending books, films and music we've enjoyed in the previous fortnight. For those of you who enjoyed What Have You Been Reading slot, that's where you'll now find it. It's an hour of tunes, musings and superior book chat. Also, Lot listeners get their names read out, accompanied by lashings of praise like this. Esther Brookfield, thank you. Tara Kunert, thank you. Virginia Faulkner, thank you. Jessica Kirk, thank you. Susanna Taylor, thank you.
Eyelid Troop, thank you. Brian Howell, thank you. Carlotta Collins, thank you. Karen Cooper, thank you. Lisa B, thank you. Thank you so much for listening, for everyone. And for those in or near London, please join us live at Foyles in Charing Cross Road at 6:30pm on Wednesday, the 23rd of October, for the live recording of our Halloween episode, where we will be discussing Arthur Conan Doyle's Unheimlich collection, Round the Fire stories, with our traditional Ghoulmeisters, Andrew Mayle and Laura Varnum. I'll say that again. Andrew Mail and Laura Varnum, and you can book now via the Backlisted or Foyles websites. Before we go, let me ask first, Will, is there anything you wish to say about Nico and or James Young and or songs they never play on the radio that we haven't covered? Is there any last message for your listeners?
Look at Nico, look at James Young's book, which you said, the good and the bad of it, and Lawrence. These are people whose however they live their lives, the work they left behind is incredibly inspiring. I mean, Lawrence continues to leave behind. He's still making great records to this day, and it was definitely with the book. I'd say whatever frustrations I had, and obviously there was kind of comedic value to be. I wouldn't have done it if I didn't think that the artistic value was incredibly high. That was at the heart of it. It was the only reason I redid the book in the first place, is because I find Lawrence fascinating.
Yeah. Caroline, anything you would like to say that we didn't cover?
2 wonderful, wonderful books that I've absolutely loved immersing myself with. And I just think they both of these characters posit alternative views of the world and are singular, fascinating people that have generated incredible pieces of art.
Yeah. Well, John, he left us these podcasts, so we should cherish them.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting when we have a book where we can't give 100% approbation to, but you got to love somebody. This is everything that's right and wrong about this book is in this quote from it. I was beginning to learn that musicians don't talk much. It's not that they're enigmatic or interesting; they just have nothing to say. Well, it's a good line, James, but actually your whole book is kind of about that.
Yes, for all its cynicism, there is absolutely beautiful poetry within it, and I think it's an incredibly vivid book, and I love it.
Yeah.
And hate it.
Yeah, I love it and hate it. The last were well said.
I wish well for the memory of Le Kid, who is Nico's son and is such a great character in the book.
Yeah. Okay, thanks everyone. And thank you, Caroline, and thank you, Will. This has been absolutely fantastic. I've so enjoyed this. And we'll see you in a fortnight. Thanks so much.
Okay.
Thanks guys.
Everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Regrets? I've no regrets. No. Except that I was born a woman instead of a man. That's my only regret.